Just recently, a small look into the first Dragon Prince game, Tales of Xadia, was released with a sample tale, The Lost Oasis. As it is the first game to take place in the Dragon Prince universe, we were super excited to learn more about it, and got the pleasure of speaking to one of the people that helped make the game, Cam Banks. If you enjoy what you hear in the following interview and want to learn more, check out the game's website at talesofxadia.com, where you can pre-order the full game and take a look at the playtest tale. Now, let's begin. Hey everyone, today we have another Dragon Prince themed interview. This time we are going to be talking about the new Dragon Prince game, Tales of Xadia, and we are here with Cam Banks, and he is the creative director and rules designer for the game, as well as for the Cortex Prime RPG system, and he's also a big fan of the Dragon Prince. Could you introduce yourself a bit more and about your role in creating the first Dragon Prince game?
Yeah, thanks. I have a funny accent because I'm from New Zealand, and so I'm talking to everyone here from the future. And no, I lived in the US for 22 years and moved back to New Zealand in the last couple of years. And after I moved back, in fact, I got this position at Fandom with Cortex and supervising all of the projects we have for this. So Cortex is not a new system. It's new to some people, but it has been around for about 10, 15 years now in various incarnations, and almost all of those have been with licensed products. So we did Marvel Heroic, so we also did Supernatural, Smallville, Firefly, a lot of other games. And now we're turning it into a Dragon Prince game, which is one of my favorite things to do right now, is work on this. So I'm extremely happy that we're turning the system to some new people to check out, and the fans so far have been incredible.
Could you describe the game for the audience, for someone who has never heard of it before or played it before?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we have got a lot of stuff going on in the background and designing it and planning it. We've released a playtest at talesofxadia.com for people to check out. They can go and look at the rules and so on there and try out the game with some pre-made characters. They're all original. They're all completely approved by Wonderstorm, the people who make Dragon Prince. So these are canon characters, but they're also not tied into the story so much that you don't feel you can't play them. So this is a role-playing game, tabletop role-playing game, just like Dungeons and Dragons and other games like it. But in our case, we're trying to launch this with full digital tools as well. So if you don't want to play around the table with your friends, or you can't, because a lot of us these days can't do that, you can play online. But if you still have a family game night or something and you want to play, you've also got the ability to bring out your tablet or your laptop or something and do a lot of the character management for the game using that. So it does use dice. We've got dice rollers online, but you can use your standard D&D style dice for this game. The only die that doesn't get used is the 20-sided die. So we are kind of different that way. We have 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, but no 20.
Awesome. So how did you first get into the tabletop genre?
Good question. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm coming up on my 50th year as a human this year, which is obviously makes me quite old. But I started gaming when I was about 11 years old, back in the 80s, and with D&D and all the games that were out then, friends at school, that kind of stuff. But as far as work, around about 2000 was when the third edition of D&D came out, and a lot of folks like me were kind of really eager to try and work on that because they had made it an open game license. A lot of people could make their own rules for it and make their own stuff. I caught the attention of Margaret Weiss, who is the co-creator of Dragonlance, and she writes a lot of those books. And she ended up hiring me to work for her company because she was bringing Dragonlance back to D&D fans all around the world. So that was my start back in the 2000, 2002, working on that kind of stuff. And since then, a lot of the work I've been doing has been similar, adapting something to a tabletop genre so people can play some of their favorite characters in their favorite worlds.
Thank you. So what was it like getting to work on the Dragon Prince franchise in this way?
It's kind of surreal because, you see something like this on Netflix and you get really into it, and then suddenly the opportunity comes up where someone says, well, we're really looking for someone to partner with to do a tabletop game. And fandom at this time, we're looking around for something that was really appealing, that we thought would be a super good launch for the new Cortex that we were working on. And Dragon Prince was the perfect candidate. We've also got Legends of Grayskull lined up, which is Masters of the Universe. So, these sorts of big properties with huge fan bases and people very excited, the most fun to work on. And so far, even just with this playtest we've got with these new characters and the story, the Lost Oasis, we've been just stunned. There's been fan art, there's like fanfic, there's people just, they pick their favorite character and talk about it on Twitter and on Facebook and so on. It's blown us away. I've never had this kind of reaction for a game that I've worked on before since ever.
Yeah, definitely. That's the Dragon Prince fandom for you. They're pretty awesome. And yeah, just these kind of big shows in general, you'll get that kind of reaction to it. So I was wondering, since you are a big fan of the show, who is your favorite character from it?
I am totally Team Claudia. I'm Claudia all the way. It's funny, internally at when we're working on this, we get on our Zoom meetings and so on, and sometimes it comes up that we have to do one thing or another, and I said, well, what would Claudia do? And everyone gets mad at me because obviously, she is the best and they have to recognize it.
So this this game is based off the TV show, and Wonderstorm was involved in its production in some ways. Could you explain what it was like working with them, what say they had, what they wanted to make sure was included or not included?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're very much, as a licensee, we are very much appreciative of them letting us play in their sandbox, right? That's kind of how I like to sort of describe it. They've made this amazing world. They're allowing us to tell stories within the world and letting other people, mostly fans, I guess in this case, create their own characters and play in the world too. So because of that relationship, we work very closely together. We have kind of a process where we create things and we have them approve it and they review, they give their feedback and comments. Sometimes we ask questions like, what about the Skywing Elves? How does this work? And they'll give us information back and tell us. But what we don't want to do is spoil any of the future coming seasons because there is a lot of stuff coming out. So for example, in this first game product we're putting out, you won't be able to create Star Touch elves, for example, because we don't want to go there. That's a bit outside the realm of what we do. So it's really this kind of conversation that we have with them. We say, okay, we want this artwork. How do we do that? We were able to get Hannah and Dorothy, two of the artists from the show, to do the artwork for our book. The front cover is from Dorothy Yang, and Hannah has been doing a lot of the characterizations and character pictures that we've been able to share. So it all looks authentic, and that's one of the best things about it, is that because of that close partnership we have with Wonderstorm, we feel we have that authentic touch to it without sort of having to make up things too much and have it be wrong and the fans notice that it's not right.
So earlier you mentioned Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of tabletop games are based on very similar principles that we generally reference within Dungeons and Dragons, but they all find their own unique style, of course. What were some concepts you built into this game that made you feel it was distinct from other tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, the biggest difference I think that people will find is with Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of it is combat centered, and that's not a bad thing for an action adventure kind of game, with Dungeons and Dragons being a lot more about exploring tombs and fighting monsters and that kind of thing. With the Dragon Prince, although there is a bit of battle and so forth on the show, it's not the focus by any means. And so we felt that rather than trying to go down that route and kind of just do a combat game with some role playing around it, we wanted to make role-playing and the character's motivations and storytelling traits to be the most central part of a character. So each character has a list of values, which are the how much they find importance in various things like devotion and glory and mastery of skills and so on. So whenever you're doing anything in the game, you need to know what's motivating my actions right now. Am I doing this because of a love for my friends? Am I doing it because I really want to aspire towards greatness? And we think that's a great thing for the folks who've seen the show and know that each character seems to be different in that way, and not just because one's a fighter and one's a wizard.
Awesome. For a more specific question, I guess, in the rulebook, it says that humans who can channel primal magic like Callum are really rare,
Mhm.
and they can't really learn it this way for the game. So
Yep.
instead, you can be a dark mage, which we've seen several times in the show, and it's actually said to be difficult, dangerous, and evil. What do you see as some side effects of a player using dark magic long term in one of their sessions?
Yeah, good question. I mean, on the show, we've already seen a couple of characters. Obviously, Viren and Claudia are primary examples of dark mage characters, but even Kellum used dark magic, as we saw, and it was kind of bad. It was not a good thing for him to do. Felt bad, and there was sort of this sense of corruption. And so, in the game, dark mages have to walk a pretty fine line before they don't want to get too much corruption and too much of this sort of dark energy that changes them and makes them look bad. um, they can cover it up, they can use spells and magic to try and make themselves look fine, but the longer they do this and the more they work on it, especially really big spells like bringing people back to life, that kind of thing is going to really affect them long term. So I would say if you're looking to play Dark Mage, look for that kind of tricky, fine tightrope to walk between, really doing cool spells that you can create yourself versus how will you shoulder that burden of the corruption later.
So these sort of games tend to have like additions and they tend to evolve as time goes on. As the show progresses, are there plans to include things like star-touched elves or humans who can do magic as the show develops, or is that more of a we'll cross that bridge when we get there sort of thing?
Well, definitely we have to see how things go, right? Because you don't want to just make promises that we don't, can't meet later on. But we have lots of plans for expanding the game beyond just the first book. And we think that Wonderstorm's a really amazing partner, and therefore they want to support it the same way. So, I'm looking ahead. I think that we would like to explore more things that we couldn't first touch on in this game because the show is slowly introducing more. We'll definitely want to do a lot more with that.
So, which mechanics, if any, were inspired by the show itself, and which mechanics do you think best captures the essence of the show?
Oh, wow. Good question. Obviously, I could talk a little bit about the values, and we spent a great deal of time figuring out what those are going to be. What were the sort of the 6 things that seemed to be themes of the show that would come up the most for characters? And so we had to work on that. But there are a couple things like we had to come up with an entirely new sort of system called challenges where we could have a number of players trying to take care of a thing that wasn't necessarily like a fight, but like a kind of a problem or some serious thing that they have to try to all work together to deal with. And so the way this plays out is that each player then gets to try and tackle it their own way. Like they don't have one set way they have to deal with it. Like in a normal D&D style fight, you might have a bunch of goblins and you have to fight them all, and then once you beat them, then you win. We know that there are characters like Ezran who just aren't like that. They're not like combat monsters. And so if you're playing the game and you want to have your character be useful and feel like they're doing something fun, let's let them approach a problem their own way. So when it's their turn, they can do, I'll do this thing. I'm going to talk to the animal and see what it wants to do. Is it going to help us out, or is it going to, turn against us? And that way each player gets their own sort of focus and spotlight for a moment, and no one feels like they're, overwhelmed by options, and no one feels sort of like they're not as cool as the rest of the players.
So when it came to naming certain mechanics such as plot points, what exactly was your inspiration?
Oh yeah, a lot of this stuff comes from the Cortex system that we'd already worked on. We did the Cortex Prime game handbook, which was what I had written, and we had published that last year. So things like plot points and a lot of the rules elements were from there. And we brought in what we felt was the most appropriate for the Tales of Xadia game, and then the rest of the raw rules and mods and things we left in that toolkit. Cortex Prime is kind of like a big building block set, right? You take the bits that you need for a game and then you make a game out of it. And so we didn't need everything from the Cortex Prime toolkit. We just needed the stuff that was useful for Tales of Xadia. But some of the stuff we did have to tweak a little bit to make it work, but that's my job. So
Makes sense. So I read through the playtest tale, the Lost Oasis, and I thought it was really cool. A lot of interesting things in there for Dragon Prince fans. But I noticed it was, very separated from the story of the animated show because you got brand new characters, a whole new location being introduced. So is this similar? Is this how the actual game, the full Tales of Xadia game, will feel? Would you say?
well, we want to try and let folks have a little bit of a limited area to play with first, to try and get the rules and understand it without making too much of a big impact on things. But no, we really want folks to feel as if they're having an influence over what the events of the world. And so, as opposed to some games where like it's a licensed thing, but we aren't allowed to touch what's going on in the main story, Wonderstorm is giving us almost like parallel events that they won't be showing on the show necessarily, but we will be able to deal. And it'll be really cool if the stuff that the players have done in Lost Oasis and then future adventures, that they can sort of look back on the show and say, hey, that sounds like a thing that we did in our game, without being completely the direct reference, but enough that that you've actually been part of the world as it goes.
So do you think we'll be like meeting some of the characters from the show in the game and such?
Yeah, and we'll be going to places that you've already known from the show. Like Anine was not necessarily anything that the players from the TV show featured, but Luxoria, the border, the 5 human kingdoms, everything that we've already seen in the show is open for playing in, and we'll be telling tales in those places.
Awesome. That's super exciting.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
So a lot of the mechanics are named from the game, and you also mentioned some came from Cortex. I noticed a lot of the mechanics were named almost after like storytelling for television and movies. There's scenes and a narrator and a dramatic, I believe it was like dramatic plot points or something like, or plot points is something. Were those specifically from Cortex, and how did those names develop as opposed to things like Dungeon Master?
Yeah, Cortex was kind of, like I said, it grew out of another series of licensed games, and a lot of those games were based on TV or film. Smallville was obviously a 10-year long running game, and we wanted to try and capture what it felt like to play a CW TV show when you're playing that. So we incorporated a lot of material from different games when we put Cortex Prime together. And the one thing I really love about it is it feels like you're working on kind of a movie or a TV, or sort of uses that kind of cinematic terminology to help you understand it. And I think most folks can get what a scene is. They understand what it means when it's like, okay, so we're going to wrap the scene up and move on to something else, and they'll get what that means. The camera's off, now we jump ahead and we'll do something else too. So in some ways too, this also emulates the TV show for the Dragon Prince, because we can kind of use common reference in that way. And this is not just built for Dragon Prince, but it was, like I said, came from Cortex, and it's the sort of default way we approach it.
I was wondering, will the rest of the game continue off right after when the playtest tale takes place, or was that kind of like an isolated event in the story?
Well, the Tales of Xadia game is going to be set between seasons 3 and 4. That's the kind of the default period, right? So the Lost Oasis is kind of around that point too. It follows after the end of season 3's amazing end, and I know some people haven't caught up to that. I don't know if anyone of you watching has not, but I mean, anyone who's a fan of the show obviously is eagerly waiting for season 4 to start, and we kind of want to bridge that gap a little bit just for this product. So we're going to be focusing on that time period, and as things go, we will be able to tell more stuff later on.
Were there any things you wanted to include in the game but really couldn't find a place for?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, obviously some things you just sort of think, well, I'd like to put, other kinds of elves in there that we haven't seen yet, right? Hey, can we use these elves? And, I understand the reason why, and it's important that we don't spoil that stuff, but we will be able to touch on a few of those things because there's some information that's come out. Like we know that they're called tide-bound elves and they have the ocean, primal source and so on. But honestly, I think that even with the material that we are allowed to use, we're going to go some great places, and we're going to have more information in this book than people have even seen on some of this stuff. So a huge, big draw for fans.
That's awesome. Well, that was all our questions, and thank you so much for answering all those. We got a lot of good information, and it seemed like you had a lot of fun making the game, and I can't wait to, see the rest of it.
Yeah, I can't wait to show it to you. I'm looking forward to it. We've got an amazing team here at Fandom and an amazing team at Wonderstorm to work with, and we're just going to keep putting material out and give you some more previews as time goes on.
Can't wait. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.